Welcome to Season 14, Episode 11 of Sports Scene. I'm Jillian Carroll, and I am here today with Sam and Reagan, and we are about to talk about everything NFL draft. So it is right around the corner. We want to see how the Trojans are going to do in the draft and maybe talk about some of our other favorite topics. So to start off, who do you all most wish was returning to the Trojan roster in the fall?
I'll go ahead and jump in. So the way I look at this primarily, not by talent per se, obviously talent's a factor, but these are all guys going to the NFL. All of them are extremely talented in their own right. So I'm looking at this from a standpoint of need. And the reality is when you look at the Trojans roster up and down, there's talent at every position, but the one thing that might be in question is the offensive line, and that's not nothing new. That's been the case for a while now. So if we want to talk about protecting Kedon Slovis and we want to talk about making sure that he's upright and sturdy in the pocket, you got to go offensive line. I'm going to go with Elijah Vera Tucker just because he was so steady, he was so reliable. It's almost like the corner conundrum where they talk about if you're not really noticing the corner on film, then he's probably doing a good job. Same thing with the offensive line. You really didn't notice AVT a whole lot throughout the season because he was doing his job, making sure dudes were blocked, making sure Kedon wasn't under duress. So the fact that there's so much questions around the offensive line going into this next season gives me the one little piece of this USC Trojans roster. It's a fun little exercise. Obviously, you can't do it, but it would be fun to have AVT back around this next year.
Yeah, absolutely. But I would agree. I mean, Kedon Slovis, his struggles have been well documented. We had the LA Times article about his lack of confidence, and I think the shifting wide receiver group isn't going to help that. It's only going to make it worse. I think a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's been his security blanket sort of last year. You take that game against Arizona, the final touchdown drive goes 6 for 6 with 5 completions to St. Brown. If you average out his receiving yards last season over a full season with a bowl game and a Pac-12 title game, that's back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. That's a lot of production and a lot of reliability at wide receiver that Slovis isn't going to have in what's supposed to be a bounce-back season for him. I mean, he had more touchdowns in a shortened season last year than he did in 2019. And so I think losing a top target like that could certainly spell trouble for Kedon Slovis, even more than maybe a shifting offensive line might.
Perhaps, but you know what they say, man. It's more important to have your quarterback comfortable in the pocket than it is to have talent at the wide receiver position. And on top of that, I mean, have you been seeing the tape out of camp? He'll be all right with his wide receivers. Brew McCoy, Drake London, he's straight. I promise you, those dudes can all ball. Drake London's over here going Odell Beckham one-handed catches, man. It's ridiculous what they're capable of. So for me, the primary concern still lies in the offensive line because we talk about his struggles last year. I would assert that probably to two things: play calling, but obviously Graham Harrell was back into a couple of different corners last year. But I would assert that primarily to the offensive line struggles. Not having quarterbacks generally need around 3 seconds to operate at fullest capacity, and not having that 2 to 3 seconds, it makes it very difficult on you. And that's why you saw him dump the ball off to another guy who I would consider to be a safety blanket, Drake London. As long as you have those dudes, you're going to be all right. Drake London's an NFL player down the line. Brew McCoy's an NFL player down the line. He'll be straight, but he needs NFL players on that offensive line too. You have Jalen McKenzie. He's talented, but outside of Jalen McKenzie, you don't have a whole lot of continuity there. Brent Nealon's on his way out. So you got to have, I think, a little bit more sturdiness on that offensive line. There's just too many question marks for my liking.
Absolutely, but I think it's about more than just talent in this situation, right? Because we all know Kedon Slovis has all the talent in the world, but when he's saying things about how I just didn't exactly have it last year and it's sort of all in his head. I mean, spring practice footage is great, but when push comes to shove, who's the ball going to? And in that UCLA game, when they needed the touchdown, the ball went up to Amon-Ra St. Brown on the goal line. That's where he went. And so I think psychologically having a guy that he knows he can throw to that's no longer there, I think will spell problems. I mean, Brew McCoy and Drake London are incredibly talented, but it's all about the sort of connection that he has with Kedon Slovis, something that St. Brown has had over the last couple of years and has been insanely productive for him. Offensive line, sure, but I think when he drops back to throw the ball, which we saw him struggle to do a couple of times regardless of offensive line play, I think a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown coming back would be huge for him, and that's not going to be there.
Well, let me ask you this. As a quarterback, when you're sitting in that pocket, are you more concerned with the 300 plus pounds dude trying to come for your head, or are you more concerned about who you're throwing the ball to?
I mean, sure, the 300-pound dude's incredibly concerning, but talent is all you need on the offensive line, right? It's not as much of how well do they work with Slovis, as long as you can bring the guys in to block for Slovis. You can have all the talent in the world at wide receiver, but if Slovis doesn't mesh, then it's going to be a problem, right? It's more than just how good are the dudes. It's how well do the dudes work with Slovis. And St. Brown did in a season where Slovis had big struggles that he admitted himself.
I do think another thing that should be said here is the fact that you do have Graham Harrell, and because of the offensive scheme that he runs, a lot of it has to do with, him running wide receivers and routes that are going to get them open. A lot of times what you see in offenses are what they call option routes, where, a dudes will they'll have the option to say, maybe I want to go on a go or I want to go on a comeback. It's going to depend on how my defender's playing me. That's not what exists in Graham Harrell's air raid offense. You run the route that you're supposed to run because he's so apt at saying, okay, I see the defense that's coming. I can predict that. I know if I send this dude on a post route, the flat route's going to be wide open right here. So Graham Harrell's going to get your wide receivers open. That's not going to be a concern to me. The concern is, can we hold Keaton up for long enough to make sure that he can get the ball there? So I'm going to have to go offensive lineman. You make a sound argument for the wide receiver position, and everyone knows, like, Amon-Ra, I'll talk my behind off about Amon-Ra all day long, but I got to go with the offensive lineman. Keep my boy Keaton upright.
Yeah, definitely. But, I mean, again, I think it's about more than talent. And you see in the NFL, obviously, offensive line turnover spells huge problems for teams from year to year. But in college, it doesn't seem to be as big of an issue, right? Teams lose top talent offensive linemen in the first or second rounds, and they pull them in again. As long as you're bringing in the bodies, you're bringing in the talent, I think that's all that matters at the offensive line position. Whereas wide receiver, it can be a little different. It can be a little more challenging for quarterbacks.
That's absolutely right. And I think both of you have brought up some super important points, and I think, kind of for me, looking at it from a point of a fan, and I want to watch it and I want to see what's going to happen. Of course, I'm going to miss the wide receiver. I'm going to miss the huge catches. I'm going to miss Amon-Ra. I'm going to miss cheering for that, seeing that. But at the same time, from a standpoint, if I were on the field, if I were the quarterback, I think I'd definitely be worried about my offensive line. I'd be worried about the 300-pound guy charging towards me as I'm trying to figure out my decision making where I'm going to make the pass. Yeah.
No doubt about it. And obviously, these are all pipe dreams, right? These dudes are about to go into the NFL. And that's what we're going to get into today. So we can't really keep any of them as much as we'd like to, right? They're all, like I said at the top of the segment, talented in their own right. We're really grasping at straws here in terms of who we'd like to keep. A lot of this comes down to our personal experiences, right? But, like I said, like we keep going back to those 300-pound dudes. That's a concern. Particularly, we can even bring up how dominant Oregon's defense has been. I don't want to go down too far down that rabbit hole, but you got to play some dudes on the defensive line in that Pac-12. Whereas the skill positions, you're pretty much set when you look at USC year in and year out. They've never hurt at those positions.
And I would say that almost is what makes my argument, right? I think USC has all the talent in the world to go out and win the Pac-12, to be a top team in the country. And you could argue they might be the most talented team in the Pac-12, given what they returned as opposed to Oregon. And so it's all about fit. It's all about how well does it mesh. And I think that's what it comes down to when you lose a guy like St. Brown, you lose a top target at wide receiver. I think that can affect a quarterback who has self-admitted to confidence, issues. So I think that's sort of where I put the emphasis on the wide receiver position for Slovis specifically.
Definitely. And I'm just kind of wondering, with what we have coming into USC next fall, for next season, do you guys think that losing those two guys, are they going to be able to replace that? Is there going to be someone who's going to be there to be able to, Sam, what you were talking about, replace that connection that Keaton has with Amon-Ra? Do we have someone coming in that can kind of fill that hole on the offensive line and keep that solid?
I think, especially at the wide receiver position, there are absolutely guys, like you said, with Brew McCoy and Drake London, who could fill that role. I just don't know if they will, right? I think that's a much bigger question mark because it's not just about how good they are. It's about how well do they work with Slovis. And in Slovis' specific situation with his confidence struggles, that's where I tend to doubt the ability to replace a role like that a guy like St. Brown plays.
I will say I'm kind of on the contrary because you do have guys that you're returning. A guy that I'm particularly excited about, Josh Jackson, that dude's taken. But again, when you're looking at continuity on the, it's going to be a lot of the end all be all when you talk about offensive line. A lot of that, how many reps have you gotten in? How many snaps have you gotten in? And particularly at that guard and the tackle position, right? You look at the left tackle, Casey Collier, that's a redshirt freshman, not really that experienced. Right tackle Jalen McKenzie, he's going to hold it down, but even at the guard positions, Voorhees, obviously that's a guy who's seasoned, but I don't know, man. That left tackle position, that's the most important position on the offensive line. If you're not solid there, it bodes very much trouble for a right-handed quarterback whose left side is his blind side.
Definitely. Well, I'm glad we got to take a moment to look ahead a little bit because, Reagan, as you said, that is just a dream. These guys are headed to the draft, and we're going to see what's going to happen with them. But my next question is, who is the most underrated Trojan prospect going into the 2021 draft?
I know this might seem a little surprising considering he has the first-round mock from just about anybody, but I think it's Elijah Vera Tucker. There's been so much emphasis placed at the top of this offensive line class that I think there's going to be a lot of teams that are disappointed if a Slater, Sewell's going to go high, but if a Slater doesn't fall to him, they're going to want one of these guys, a Tevin Jenkins from Oklahoma State. But I think these fan bases and these front offices might be disappointed if they find themselves in a position to take a guy like Vera Tucker. He has the ability to play at tackle like we've seen, but he's also PFF's #1 rated interior offensive lineman. I think his versatility, his athleticism, and his intelligence is incredible. I think it's what makes him a great prospect. A team like the Raiders sitting down in the low teens who need help everywhere on the offensive line could really use a guy like that with versatility to plug any hole that they have. And so I think that's where he's a little underrated in terms of the top level offensive line talent.
Now, I will say, like, word on the street is he doesn't fall past the Raiders. That's what sources are saying right now. But I will say you almost made my argument for me from the last segment, but that's neither here nor there. We talk about underrated. Ain't no way an underrated prospect's going in the first round. We're talking about the dudes that are going to be going on day 3 in all likelihood. And to me, the most underrated Trojan right now has to be Elijah Griffin, or as I like to call him, my possible distant cousin. Who knows? Sources are working on that. We'll find out more on that later. But Elijah Griffin can ball, man. We've seen it for years since he got here. And the conundrum with him is because he's the son of Warren G, right? Regulators, mount up, famous, right? A lot of people have this notion that he kind of just got to USC by a proxy of his dad being who he was. Heed my word, Elijah Griffin's a baller, man. He is an absolute baller, regardless of who his dad was, regardless of whatever his family was. That dude can play football. He can play the corner position at an absolutely high level. Now, I do not an indictment on his skill set whatsoever. The nickel position is one of the emerging most important positions that you can have on a defense because of how much teams like to spread out and run their offenses now. So having a solid guy at that nickel position is going to be very important. Why does he project to the nickel position? He's an aggressive tackler. He's a versatile defender. He can defend short, quick guys, and he's aggressive enough to go toe-to-toe with possibly a tight end. So it's easy to stick him in that slot position. But you go watch this guy's tape. I'm not going to sit up here and assert that it's rivaling a J.C. Horn or a Patrick Surtain or a Farley out of I think it's Notre Dame. I forget. But he's not rivaling those dudes, admittedly. But for him to be talking day 3, that's ridiculous to me. He's easily a day 2 prospect for Virginia Tech. Thank you to our wonderful producer, Caleb Farley, is out of Virginia Tech. But he's easily a day 2 prospect in my mind. And for the life of me, I can't understand why. And I said it in our video segment that we did a little bit earlier this week. I don't know if it's because people don't watch USC defense a ton. I don't
All right. Yeah, I think so. Sam, I'm kind of wondering, AVT is, kind of picked to go on the first day. What more about him do you really think is underrated? Like, do you think he should go higher? Do you think coaches should be, after him more? What is that piece of it?
I think his underratedness comes in that not necessarily that he should be picked higher, right? Because you look at his draft profile, it maybe doesn't stack up with some of those guys at the top, like a Slater, like a Sewell, even a Tevin Jenkins. But I think where it lies is the disappointment is going to come, right? You're going to take Vera Tucker because you have a needed offensive line, but none of these other guys ahead of him fell. That's going to be where these teams take Vera Tucker, and I think that's a mistake. I think Vera Tucker should be considered among the elite offensive linemen in this class. His versatility, his athleticism, his intelligence, I think all of that makes him a really good prospect that should be considered in this group. He shouldn't be considered the Raiders need an offensive lineman and all the other ones we wanted were taken, so we're going to grab Vera Tucker. I think he should be considered a part of that group and a legitimate prospect with the versatility that he has for these teams.
Let me tell y'all what happened, man. And that was a good point that you made, I will say. But let me tell y'all what happened. All the NFL scouts saw that I was trashing him for not knowing Elijah Griffin is a baller, and they kicked me off the stream. I promise you that's what happened. They hacked it. But like I was saying before Sam made his point, Elijah Avery Tucker, just to finish my point, is a baller, is definitely worthy of at least a round 3 pick. I would consider taking him in round 2 if I were an NFL GM. But, to get him in day 3, that's a steal, man. That's an absolute steal. He's going to be a starter.
I think the sort of role you outlined for him, though, is what makes him, I guess, not underrated and not worthy of a higher pick, right? At that nickel corner position, it's important. It's emerging, right? But you can get that in any draft at any point, right?
Oh, nah.
It's the top end talent at the difficult roles that you take higher in the draft, right? He may excel at that role, and that's fine, but I still don't think that makes him worthy of a higher pick, right? I think that's sort of where you take that role. You take those types of roles later in the draft because you can get them in almost any draft.
A nickel corner?
Whenever you need it.
Let me tell you something, man, because I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan, all right? We made that Super Bowl because, in part, a lot of crazy stuff happened, but in part because the play that we had at the nickel corner position. When we talk about a dude like Patrick Robinson, it was at the time, that was somebody that was vital to that team. Another Super Bowl team last year. They didn't win it, obviously, but Patrick Mahomes, everybody, he gets all the love, right? But Tyrann Mathieu was holding down that defense at the nickel corner position. Nickel corner outside of maybe pass rusher, it's emerging as arguably the most important position on that defense. You have to have a dude who's versatile, who is a kind of jack of all trades, who can go out and stick just about anybody that you need him to on a day-to-day basis. When we talk about positional versatility, that's becoming a thing, and it's obviously offensive line, that's important too, but defensively, that's becoming a very important thing. That's why a dude like Isaiah Simmons went so high last year. That's why Derwin James are so valuable. That's why a guy like Jamal Adams is so valuable. Versatility at that defensive back position is the name of the game, and nickel corners have that in spades. That's why Elijah Griffin has so much potential to me, is because he displays that versatility to guard big, to guard quick, to guard fast. His feet are so good. His hand placement is like, I need me a nickel corner. If I'm filling positions that I absolutely need as a defensive coordinator, give me my pass rusher first. I'm not looking at the linebacker next. I'm looking at defensive back, and I want a guy who I can plug in at that nickel position, or at that safety position, or at the outside position. Elijah Griffin. We're talking about Elijah's here, but he can do all that, man. I need a nickel. Let's not understate the importance of that position at all.
Absolutely, but in your comps, you named what, 5, 6 guys? It's Isaiah Simmons, it's Jamal Adams, it's Tyrann Mathieu. Maybe you want to throw Budda Baker in there.
Yeah,
these dudes are like transcendent talents. When you see one in the draft, you know it. I mean, Isaiah Simmons gave his interview in the combine. They asked him what position you play, and he said defense. Like, that dude was an absolute beast at Clemson, doing everything that Brent Venables asked him to do. And that's why you take them high. But we're not going to say Elijah Griffin. We're not going to project that on him, are we? A top 5, top 6 in the league?
I ain't saying that. I ain't saying
all-world talent. That's why you don't take him up high.
The dude is a top 5 prospect. But what I'm saying is, in the scheme of corners, you have Patrick Surtain, you have J.C. Horn, you have Caleb Farley, who would be on this level if it weren't for the injuries, and then you kind of have everyone else. And that, because of that kind of everyone else, you kind of have a mix of dudes that could end up on day 3, could end up on day 2. But to me, it's those 3 guys, and then there's a really good argument to say after those 3, Elijah Griffin should be in the conversation for that 4-5 spot. And I don't really understand why he's not, because of the talent that he's displayed. So I'm not by any stretch saying that he's going to go out there and be the transcendent talent that Derwin James is. But what I'm saying, for the value that you're going to be getting, saying, yeah, I can go get this guy in the 6th round. That's the 2nd, 3rd round prospect in my eyes, easily.
Yeah, but I think that sort of makes the point, right? When you see a guy like an Isaiah Simmons, or you see a guy like a Derwin James or a Jamal Adams, you know it. You see that talent, you see the physical abilities, and that's why you take them up high. But some of the other guys who go later in the draft to fill those roles, you're taking them hoping they can become that, right? You maybe see that in a guy like Elijah Griffin, and you take him hoping that they can fill that role, which is why you don't take them up high, right? You take the guys like Surtain, you take the guys like Farley, who have proven themselves as cover corners, and then you take your chances later in the draft on guys like Griffin. I don't think that's an indictment on him to take him lower. It's just the nature of that type of role on the field.
That's the nature of how people perceive him. Now, I'm telling you that from my vantage point, the dude is easily a 2nd, 3rd round prospect, but because for some sort of strange reason people don't have him in that light. Here's the difference, right? When we talk about the word underrated, because that's kind of the hinge point of the argument, my point is Elijah Vera Tucker is going to be a top 15 pick in all likelihood. If at worst case scenario, he's the 17th pick. If we're talking about splitting hairs between, maybe the 6th, 7th pick versus the 17th pick, that value, that value disparity between those 10 picks in the first round is not as deep of a value disparity as you're talking about potentially around the 70th pick in the draft versus the 130th pick in the draft. That's where the disparity is for me. That value lies, and that's why Elijah Griffin is so much more underrated than Elijah Vera Tucker. I'm not going to deny the talent, and that's why he's going to be a first-round pick. But the fact that I'm looking at easily a day 2 guy and you can snag him on day 3, that's what makes the dude underrated.
All right, well, I'm going to give y'all a quick chance to take a breath while I introduce a next piece of our show. Reagan, I believe you have a hot take for us. I believe you have something spicy to let us know.
So I grew up places. Y'all know this. I've lived in Memphis. I've lived in California. I've lived in New Jersey. But I spent a lot of time growing up around Kennesaw, Georgia, which is about 45 minutes outside of Atlanta. So y'all know me as the Philadelphia Eagles fan, but there was a time when young Reagan Griffin was an Atlanta Falcons fan. So they're always going to hold a place in my heart. And I'm looking at what they can do with their draft options. And ultimately, I've landed on this. If you're the Atlanta Falcons GM and you use that 4th pick for the purpose of doing anything other than drafting Justin Fields, you've made a mistake. Justin Fields is a talented prospect as all get out, right? We talk about, there's been a lot of semantics thrown around, and I won't go down the rabbit hole of the black quarterback because I would need about an hour to do that. But we can talk about the accuracy. He's got it. We can talk about the arm strength. He's got it. Pocket presence. He's got it. Scrambling ability, he's got it. He's checked every single one of the boxes. He's a leader. He's been dealing with this epilepsy thing as well, so he's a resilient player. There's no reason not to draft Justin Fields in the top 5 unless you've talked yourself out of it for God knows why. If you're the Falcons, you have a 35-year-old Matt Ryan who hasn't looked that good in years. You're talking about possibly trading the best wide receiver in the game right now, Julio Jones. You have so much talent on that offense, and year in and year out, nothing to show for it. It's about time you go out and get a quarterback, and you are in prime position to go get a franchise guy in Justin Fields right now. If you do anything else, and I'm saying if you draft Kyle Pitts, if you draft Penei Sewell, if you trade back, any of those things would be a mistake. You have to draft Justin Fields, not to mention the dude went to Harrison High School, which is in Kennesaw, Georgia. You like how I did the full circle thing.
This is such a difficult position you've put me in here because I agree with everything you said about Justin Fields, and this may be the position I hold most strongly in the draft. I think he's going to be the best quarterback out of this group, except for this one spot you have him in. I think it's a terrible fit in Atlanta. I think that's the one spot he can't go, because if Atlanta takes a quarterback, they're not playing him over Matt Ryan. That's not going to happen. He's going to sit a year. They're going to do the Patrick Mahomes behind Alex Smith thing, except Matt Ryan has 3 more years on his deal, and it is expensive. So if you want to sit Justin Fields for a season and turn around in 2022 and start him, well, now you got to get rid of Matt Ryan, right? Because he's not going to deal with that. Matt Ryan's not going to take getting benched, and that's going to be expensive to get rid of him. And so you slowly start hindering your cap situation, and you got a lot of money going out to a lot of people that maybe even aren't playing on your team, and that hinders your ability to build around Fields. And now we hit year 2, year 3. We haven't put talent around Fields. Julio is gone, and now you're back where you started. And so I think you trade out. You either take Kyle Pitts, who's an incredible offensive talent, and you just go all in an NFC South that who knows what it looks like, right? The Saints are going to regress. Who knows what the Panthers are? And sure, the Bucs are good, but you could argue there's maybe 6 winnable games there, and you don't need many else after that. You need 4, maybe 4 more wins, and you're in the playoffs. And so if you trade out, you trade back, get some more assets, you get a corner like a Caleb Farley, like a Patrick Surtain, or a J.C. Horn. I think that's the much better move than taking a quarterback that's kind of going to get stuck in the wings there in Atlanta.
Yeah, okay, here's the difference. All right, you're talking about things that are going to happen down the line. Okay, I'm going to have to do the semantics of trading and getting Matt Ryan off my books. Oh, do I have to sit Justin Fields? Get the best possible football players on your team and let them do what they do. That's always been my philosophy when it comes to the draft. Obviously, I, as an Eagles fan, was just in this really tricky situation with Carson Wentz and Jalen Hurts. But ultimately, what that thing taught me is if I'm sitting in that seat, I don't give a damn who's doing what, who's pissed about what, who's sad that they're on the bench. I'm going to put the best 11, the best 22 out on that field and let them do what they do. Matt Ryan has not proven himself to be, and I think he still has something in him that can be top 10 caliber, but because he hasn't shown me that, I have to look in another direction because I have so much talent on my offense right now. We don't have much longer with Todd Gurley. We don't have that much longer with Julio Jones. Especially if year in and year out, he's disappeared. Like, you're not able to get him the ball at the rate that you need to. You just got Calvin Ridley, right? There's so much going on right now that you need to capitalize on this while you still can. And the way you do that is with the homegrown talent in Justin Fields, man. You got to do that. And if Matt Ryan has to go, then Matt Ryan has to go. If you have to pay a little bit of his contract to do that, then you do that. But the fact of the matter is, you have to get the talented quarterback to run your offense.
Matt Ryan has a $35 million price tag with him, right? You can't.
He's a 35-year-old dude too.
Well, yeah, but that doesn't matter. Like, the team, like, you still have that money is still there. Whether you bench him or you trade him, you've got to get that money out, and that hinders your ability to build around Justin Fields. If they're already talking about trading Julio, their situation's not great. They got a lot of money and a lot of guys that are getting up there and maybe aren't super talented anymore. You pumped a lot of money into a guy like Grady Jarrett, who plays one good game against my Saints every year and gets like 6 sacks, and that's it. That's where all the money's going. And so, sure, you can say we'll move on from Matt Ryan. Who cares what Matt Ryan thinks? But Matt Ryan still carries around a $35 million price tag each season for 3 more years that has to go somewhere. And it's going to come to the detriment of the Falcons if they
I see what's happening here. You said you're a Saints fan?
Absolutely.
Okay, so you just had this baggage with Drew Brees for all these years, so you think that everybody has to do that. It doesn't have to go like that. Just because you got an old behind quarterback who's not what he used to be doesn't mean you just have to leave him on the books. Your Saints just made that mistake. That ain't got to be everybody. Not everyone's doomed to that fate. You can do something else other than perhaps paying Taysom Hill. I don't mean to keep coming for your Saints, but point being, you have a franchise quarterback in your hands from your city, talented as all get out, about to drop to you because the Jets seem to want Zach Wilson and the 49ers either want Mac Jones or Trey Lance. I think it's Trey Lance. That's besides the point. You have a talented quarterback right in your fingertips and the opportunity to take that, and you want to go with Kyle Pitts? You want to trade back?
Trade out.
Ain't no way. Ain't no way.
Because what's going to happen is applies to all 31 other teams in the league. Like, if he's this aging quarterback that's too expensive, well, guess what? If you don't want it, someone's got to deal with it, right? You can't just make it go away. Like, I mean, who is going to take on Drew Brees? The Saints just had to roll with him, right? You can't just trade him to somebody. You get nothing for it. Nobody wants that contract. You
had to roll, and maybe that is the worst case scenario, is that maybe we got this old behind dude who really can't play like that no more, and he's taking up money on our books. But the reality is that's not a good reason to not go get the most talented football players available and get people who fit your vision for the future, right? You have a young, talented core right now. Even if Julio Jones, like the fact that
who is that young, talented
trading
core?
Julio Jones, the best wide receiver in the NFL, because of this thing that we have with Matt Ryan, don't do that. Don't do that. You don't have to doom yourself just because here's what happened. Just because you shot yourself in the foot with the Matt Ryan contract doesn't mean you have to keep shooting yourself in the foot with these decisions down the line. You can recuperate that in some fashion by going and getting this quarterback right now. If Matt Ryan has to sit on the bench and make $35 million doing it, so be it. But at least you're going to be a better football team down the line.
What's left to put around Justin Fields if you have $35 million dead dollars on the bench? I mean,
Justin Fields gets to go out and do what he's been doing since he was 16 years old, dominating at football.
I just don't think the Falcons aren't at this inflection point yet. Like, it's not easy like the Lions were. You know, the decision isn't easy right now, right? You can't just say, all right, we'll take Fields and let's go. Like, I think that's a couple years down the line. They've got to slowly move off some of these assets before they can start turning this thing around. They're not at an easy position to just jump to a rebuild and jump into a new era.
Man, that's exactly what you can do. You can get Justin Fields and just go. And you know what? Maybe
you have so much money tied up in so much
anyway, so it
non-production.
doesn't really matter, does it? Your defense is going to be trash anyway. But you can get Justin Fields and say, you know what? Maybe we got $35 million dead dollars, but we got Julio Jones, and we have Hunter Henry, and we have Todd Gurley, and we have Calvin Ridley, and now we got this young star ready to surge forward with these guys. That's what you get. And maybe you have to have 30.
Well, I mean, and off that point, I think Hunter Henry's in New England. He's got Hayden Hurst, the much worse first round tight end. Let's point that out. But I just don't love the fit, right? In this ideal world with all these weapons that we're talking about around Justin Fields. I mean, I agree with everything about Justin Fields being a generational talent, but in this one specific situation, I just don't think the fit is great. I think it's the worst fit for Justin Fields of any team in the league. I think it comes to the detriment of him and to the Falcons because you can't have Fields and the team and the offense that you currently have, right? It's one or the other. The money gets way too difficult if you're trying to transition to a new quarterback if you take Fields. And ultimately, I think that's why you take Pitts or you trade back for defensive, secondary help.
Yeah, well, both of you have brought up some super important things, but I just really quickly want to say I feel like I'm the resident Atlanta Falcons fan here. I'm born and raised in Atlanta, from Atlanta, and of course, on Matty Ice. I have my Julio Jones jersey sitting in my closet over there. But I will have to say, Sam, I do disagree with you. I may be a little bit biased in saying this, but I want to see Justin Fields play for the Falcons. That's what I want to see. And I respect the man. He deserves the MVP he got. I will take that to the grave with me. But I think it's time for some change in Atlanta. I think it's time for some change specifically at the QB. And that's something that would just make me really happy. I would love to go to the games and see Justin Fields down in the field. I'm also a Georgia fan, so having him come back into my life in the state of Georgia would be something that would be super awesome for me.
That's from a fan.
And that's from a fan. And, me and GM have to have a little conversation about that. But we'll see. We'll see what happens.
There you go.
Well, I want to thank everyone who was tuning in for listening to our last show of the spring semester. We have had a whole lot of fun, and we hope you all have as well, listening to anything and everything we have to say.
Of course.